The following podcast contains spoilers for the most recent episode of Lost, Season 6, Episode 6, entitled Sundown. But those spoilers do not happen until the second half of the episode, and I am going to warn you again before they happen. I know, I'm so good to you. Welcome to the Cloister Room, episode 007, I Hope It's Cool, with your host, a slightly sick Tom Dickinson. It's the Cloister Room, and welcome to it. This is Tom Dickinson, two eyes, no e's, and this week on the Cloister Room, I will be talking about the dreaded ReBoot. No, not the Canadian computer-animated cartoon series ReBoot that used to run on the Cartoon Network in the US. Although, as a child of the 90s, I have many fond memories of that cartoon. Anyhow, no, I'm talking about the continuity reboot, a thing that creators do when a franchise has spun so far out of control or acquired too much heavy continuity, or they just plain get lazy and decide to start over. Okay, I know I'm a few weeks late to the party, in fact, more than a month late, but word started buzzing around the internet back in January that Torchwood might be coming to America, as you probably heard. A pilot script, not a pilot episode, and certainly not a full season, has been commissioned by Fox. And there's speculation about whether this potential American Torchwood would be a reboot set in a new continuity, disregarding the old series, or whether it would continue on from the end of Torchwood Children of Earth, becoming sort of a de facto Series 4. As you can probably imagine, I, like most sane individuals, hope that it is a continuation rather than a reboot, but that's not even really all that interesting. What's more interesting is that the reports of the American Torchwood also contain a remark that Jane Tranter may try to reboot Doctor Who for American audiences. And the internet does a double take, particularly me because, as you might recall back in the Cloister Room 005, I was joking about just that, and about who I'd like to see cast as the Doctor. And I've actually had a new thought on that. I think that if they were to do a American version of Doctor Who, then I would want them to cast the gentleman who plays Dan Faraday on Lost. What's his name? Jeremy Davies, yes. Jeremy Davies is my pick for the American Doctor, and I don't think that's going to change because I do think he'd be quite good. Anyhow, back to what I was talking about. Now, at this stage, it's obviously just a rumor and not much more than that, but even if it were true, it's my opinion that there's really no reason to panic. In fact, I'm not even really all that surprised, because in this day and age, it's just natural. Everything gets rebooted, and for everything that hasn't been rebooted yet, someone will attempt to do so. In some cases, a reboot can be healthy for a franchise. It did wonders for Battlestar Galactica, which was more or less a completely new thing from its predecessor. Although the current buzz is that an upcoming film might pull another reboot on that franchise, something I'm kind of ambivalent about. And look at Star Trek. Star Trek has been spiraling into cultural irrelevance until J.J. Abrams' reboot last year managed to make it right again, managed to make it appeal to a broad audience, and personally I thought that film was pretty darn good. And look at Buffy the Vampire Slayer, an incredibly beloved franchise and one of the most culturally significant television shows of the 1990s, was a massive reboot of a mediocre movie. And when news emerged last year that the director of the original movie was working on a reboot without the involvement of Joss Whedon, who had written the original screenplay and helmed the hit TV series for 7 years, all Joss had to say was these 4 words: I hope it's cool. And that, in my opinion, is really the only sensible thing to say to the news that something is being rebooted, because it's kind of inevitable, the way the current media landscape works, that things are going to be rebooted. It happened to The Prisoner, it happened to the Batman film. Someday, it'll probably even happen to Star Wars, although it might be a long time, and it might not be until after George Lucas has kicked the bucket. And remember, the dreaded reboot almost happened to Doctor Who, twice. In '96 and in 2005, when Doctor Who returned both times, you bet your buttons that there were people pushing for a full continuity reboot. In 2005, a major reason that the program was successful is that it involved what you might call a soft reboot, in which previous continuity wasn't completely checked out the window, but it was set aside and a firm boundary was drawn between the old material and the new. I mean, here is something that you should think about. The current BBC Wales Doctor Who series is not going to last forever because, face it, nothing does. And then after it's been gone for a few years, someone else is going to try and bring Doctor Who back for a new audience, and there's a good chance that when they're thinking about how they can make it fresh for a new audience, they're going to strongly consider the possibility that a reboot might be the way to go. And maybe they'll even go through with it, and there will be a rebooted Doctor Who on British TV in 20 or 30 years. And why does this bother us so much? Because, although we may gripe about it sometimes, we like the present continuity, and we don't want to see it chucked out. Especially because with a show like Doctor Who, a soft reboot sometimes makes more sense. But that being the case, why should we worry about Doctor Who rebooting itself in the US? Why should we do anything more than hope it's cool, like Joss Whedon does? It poses no real threat to the original. Maybe it'll turn out like the US version of The Office, which is very different from the UK version, but is quote-unquote cool in its own right. Or maybe it'll turn out like the US version of Life on Mars, a critical and ratings flop. But even though a watered-down Life on Mars did spring into existence in the US, there's no harm done to the original continuity, which still continues this spring in a new season of Ashes to Ashes, for which I cannot wait. So I guess that's where I come down on this issue. Why worry about a potential US version of Doctor Who? If it ends up happening, it's just more Doctor Who to love, or alternately to hate and ignore with disdain. Either way, there's no real harm done. And now it's time for one of our regular segments here on the Cloister Room podcast, the Dune Quote of the Week. No sweeteners will cloak some forms of bitterness. If it tastes bitter, spit it out. That's what our earliest ancestors did. From Chapter House Dune. Alright, so, with that little pearl of wisdom having been delivered, I shall now announce a new segment, which shall be appearing every week on the show, in which I talk a little while about Lost. Usually it's going to be some sort of theory, or perhaps it could be some sort of commentary on what I'm liking and what I'm not liking. And yeah, this segment is going to be happening every week for as long as Lost is running, which is only about 10 or 11 more weeks. But just for your benefit, in case you either do not want to hear anything about Lost because you're tired of hearing people talk about it, or you haven't caught up with the most recent episode in the US, which in this case is Season 6, Episode 6, Sundown, I am letting you know that you can either stop listening to this podcast right this instant, or skip ahead to around the 14-minute mark, maybe a little bit before, and then you can catch the tail end of the podcast without having to hear anything I have to say about Lost. So, without further ado, here is a new segment creatively entitled Tom Says Some Stuff About Lost. Alright, still with me? Good. If you're still listening and you're not caught up on Lost, then shame on you, but just to be fair, I'm going to give you a little bit of context to bring you into the discussion. So let me just briefly explain what's going on in Season 6 with these things called the Flash Sideways, which is what I'm going to be talking about this week. Back in Season 2, our castaways learn that there's an electromagnetic anomaly on the island, which must be discharged every 108 minutes or something very bad will happen. Furthermore, they learn that the guy who performs the discharge was asleep at the wheel on the day their plane crashed, and he was a minute or two late in discharging it, so that's why they ended up on this island in the first place. Okay, skip ahead to Season 5 when things get crazy and people start traveling in time, and they end up in the 70s. They realize that the electromagnetic anomaly was created in the 70s because of an incident, and furthermore they come to think that they can prevent the incident from ever having happened by counteracting it with a hydrogen bomb that they just happen to have lying around, and this would prevent their plane from ever crashing. And it worked, sort of. Apparently it created two different timelines, one where the bomb prevented the incident and in fact destroyed the island, meaning the plane never crashes, another where they caused the incident, so everything stays the same, and the force of the incident sends them back to the 21st century where they belong. Got it? So the question is, what is going on with this alternate timeline, or as the show's creators call it, the Flash Sideways? What purpose will it serve in the narrative of the show? Because for now it's just an interesting curiosity, but it's gonna have to become relevant sooner or later, right? Right? Well, personally, I am torn between two theories. My first theory was simple. In the original timeline, John Locke is dead. It's clear that Jacob and the Smoke Monster, the two godlike forces in conflict with one another on the island, both had special plans for Locke. And it seems that Smokey has won because his plan worked. Locke died, then Smokey took over Locke's body and used to trick Ben Linus into killing Jacob. So Jacob's dead, but his ghost is still around, and so his plans are still in motion, okay? So my theory is this: that Jacob still needs Locke, but he also needed Smokey to think he was winning. So he allowed Locke to die and allowed Smokey to kill him because he knew that there was this alternate timeline that Smokey doesn't know about. And what he's going to do is he's going to borrow the Locke from that timeline, and that version of Locke will end up saving the day, so to speak. So, in other words, the Flash Sideways timeline is Jacob's secret weapon against the Smoke Monster, his little hiding place for his spare versions of characters who in this universe are dead. And frankly, I was pretty dang sure that I was on the right track, but then I heard this other theory that's popular on the internet, and, well, it's pretty compelling. And that is that the Flash Sideways are actually Flash Forwards. That what we're seeing is actually the end of the show, and that this is the reality where everyone is going to end up, possibly after they die. And it does make some sense. It could explain why the dying Juliet seemed to be aware of the Flash Sideways universe, and more importantly, it would explain Jack's strange injuries in the Flash Sideways. The thing on his neck in the season premiere was odd enough, but the scar from where his appendix was taken out, even though he doesn't remember ever having it come out, well, that could be a physical remnant of his former life on the island, where his appendix was taken out by Juliet in Season 4. Perhaps the wound on his neck is related to a mortal wound to the neck that Jack will sustain towards the end of the series. If that happened, it would certainly be consistent with Charlie. Charlie died in Season 3 of drowning, which is a form of asphyxiation, and when we first see him in the Flash Sideways, he's choking, which is another form of asphyxiation. And in some ways, this really does seem like a higher plane where things are happier. A major theme of Season 1 was that these people weren't merely lost on an island, but lost in their lives because of the issues they were facing. In the Flash Sideways, they all seem to be facing the same issues so far, but they could hardly be said to be lost. Kate being on the run, Locke being confined to a wheelchair, Jack having issues with his father. They all have the same problems they always had, but they seem better able to cope with them now. The exception, of course, being Saeed, who can never be with his true love Nadia and seems trapped in the cycle of violence that had hounded him. But far from punching a hole in this theory, Saeed actually kind of supports it. Back in the premiere of Season 6, when Saeed thought he was dying, and in fact actually was dying, he was talking to Hurley about what he thought would happen to him after he died, and he said that because of his sins he would probably not be going to heaven. If that's the case, then the reality we see in the Flash Sideways certainly doesn't seem like heaven for Saeed, and it may be something more like hell. So it could be that our favorite characters are all going to be getting their just desserts, whether for good or ill, when they're in the Flash Sideways universe. And we all know, of course, that Martin Keamy got exactly what was coming to him. And so that leaves me with two theories about the Flash Sideways. One, that they're Jacob's secret weapon, and the other, that they're the afterlife. So which one of these things do I think is true? Well, to be honest, I'm torn. I think both of them sound pretty plausible, but I can't think of any way how they could be reconciled with one another. If you have any thoughts, I'd love if you could share them in the feedback. Just send it to feedback@thecloisterroom.com. So with my thoughts on Lost out of the way, I'm going to round out the show by introducing another new feature, the Haiku Review. As you may know, the haiku is a popular Japanese poetic form. Haiku poems usually have 3 lines, and the first line must contain 5 syllables, the second line must contain 7 syllables, and the third line must contain 5 syllables. In this segment, I'm going to be giving short reviews of various things in the form of a haiku poem. Now, since, as you've probably figured out by now, I'm a bit of a TV geek, I'm going to be reviewing 3 different TV shows today. First, Caprica, the spin-off prequel to Battlestar Galactica, currently airing on Sci-Fi in the US. Unlike many geeks, I didn't like Battlestar, but this is great stuff. Next up, Damages, a critically acclaimed legal drama that airs on FX. One of TV's best, but not as good as last year. Needs more Ted Danson. And finally, the new show Human Target, an action drama on Fox. Lots of cliches here, but done with wit and panache. Do check this one out. So that about wraps it up for both the Haiku review and this week's episode of the Cloister Room. So here it is. I promised weekly episodes, and here's my first weekly episode. Although I suppose, seeing as it's only one episode, it's not really weekly until I deliver another episode a week from now. But I'll do it, you'll see. And I would love it if you guys would send me feedback. Feedback on what you think of the show, what you think of this whole one-man variety format I'm trying to do, what you think about anything I said in any one of the segments, if you have thoughts on Lost, on what I said or on any topic, or if you want to even contribute a haiku review of your own, then I would be glad to hear it or read it in audio or textual form. Just send it over to feedback@thecloisterroom.com and I will appreciate it very much. Until we meet again, this is Tom Dickinson, 2 Eyes, No E's, signing off. You've been listening to The Cloister Room, a fan-made production that has absolutely nothing to do with the BBC or ABC Studios or anyone involved in making anything mentioned in this show. Except for the show itself, and even that only barely. I don't really do much for this show. It just sort of falls from the sky, and I sort of make it and release it onto the internet under the instructions that are encoded in the metadata that are associated with the raw MP3 files that I get, and then edit together to create a show that will send subliminal messages out to everyone. I'm gonna stop talking now. I'm clearly getting delirious because I'm too sick. I will see you next week, probably.